Hey everyone, you're back watching Lit Sports Online. We got some more mixed martial arts to talk about, and it's UFC 236, Holloway versus Poirier. We're doing a preview of that event, and we're going to start with three early card fights, and then we're also going to talk about the two interim title fights. So first, getting in the start of the card, we got Ovince St. Preux versus Nikita Krylov. How do you see that one playing out?
It's an interesting fight because it's a heavyweight or a light heavyweight fight, so it's just two guys that are both good strikers and both throw heavy shots, so it just promises to be fun. And it's two guys who have been struggling to keep winning it at the top of the division, so they're both trying to earn their way back. OSP was a bigger name a few years ago, fought John Jones for the title, and he's just falling on rough times. So it'll be an interesting fight to see where both guys are headed in the division.
Another one of the preliminary fights, we got Alan Jubin versus Beanie Sigel. How's this one going to look?
I don't know much about Beanie Sigel. I don't even know how to pronounce that last name correctly. But Alan Jubin is a fun fighter to watch. He's a pretty dynamic kicker, dynamic striker, and he's also a professional model. So he's been out for over a year. Just kind of interested to see how he looks when he comes back against a newcomer to the UFC. We'll see what happens.
And then the last early card matchup is Eric Anders versus Khalil Roundtree.
Yeah, another light heavyweight fight, and it's kind of similar to the OSP Nikita Krylov fight, where it's two guys who have fallen on tougher times towards the top of the division and are just trying to get their way back, and it's just two guys who are known for throwing heavy, heavy punches. So it's going to be a super fun fight. It's going to be a brawl. And I think somebody's lights are getting turned off. I'm not sure who it's going to be, but either guy, it'd be good to see him get another win.
So some interesting fights on the early card, but now going into the co-main event, this is the interim middleweight title fight. Kelvin Gastelum versus Israel Adesanya. Now, again, it's an interim fight because the middleweight champion Robert Whittaker was out due to injury. He's having the multiple hernia surgery. So, whoever wins this fight is going to get a chance to, fight him later on. But how would you break down this co-main event?
So, I'm super excited for this fight. It's two very good strikers, two totally different styles. One of the guys on the team here is a huge fan of Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya, of course, comes from Nigeria, and it's actually super cool to see so many people of African from Africa actually in the title pictures these days. It's a sport that wasn't big on the continent until recently, and now that there are these bigger names, it's going to grow even more. And Adesanya also fights out in New Zealand, so there's a budding scene there as well. But it's two dynamic strikers with completely different styles. Adesanya, a lot of people have been saying, is like the new Anderson Silva. He hates the comparison, but I understand it because their builds are very similar, their fighting styles are very similar. They're both long-range, dynamic strikers that throw really precise shots. They're guys that don't have traditionally a ton of raw power in their punches like some of the bigger or stockier guys do, but they're so their timing is so good and their accuracy is so good that every strike they land just has a bigger impact. It lands when it should and it lands where it should. They're just technically really phenomenal strikers. And Adesanya fought Anderson Silva in his last fight, and it was really interesting. But a lot of times what happens when guys with similar styles fight is you see a little bit of holes because they're a very skilled striker is going to be able to pick apart a little bit, somebody else at the same level. So we saw Adesanya get hit a little bit. And Gastelum has an interesting style to fight against Adesanya, I think, because he is, again, he's a very good striker, and he has an interesting kind of strategy where he has a little more centered of a stance and a wider foot base. And so he has a lot of upper body movement to where he can stand at the end of the punching range, but since he stands centered instead of leaning over his front foot like a lot of boxers do, or kickboxers, he can like lean back and get his head out of the way of punches without actually having to move his body out of the range so he can't hit somebody else. And since he has this like wide kind of karate base, he's really good at like leaping in really quickly. It allows for quicker like front and back movement. And so he's able to stand right at the end of the range for a long striker, get his head out of the way, come right back in and land punches. And so it's a really, really interesting style to see against a guy like Adesanya, who's very, very long and likes to have people out at the end of his punches, at the end of his kicks, and nowhere near him. And that's where he's most effective.
So if you're, the champion Whitaker and you're kind of sitting out and watching this go down, like, who do you think he wants to win the fight, or does it not really matter? Like, who would be the easier matchup for him, do you think, or is it kind of even?
So the interesting thing, I think, is that Robert Whitaker has a similar style to Kelvin Gastelum. But Gastelum is a guy who used to fight at welterweight, so he came up a weight class from 170 to 185 because he kept missing weight. They told him to go up. And he's just been comfortable and just been demolishing people there. So he's just kind of stayed. And so the matchup between him and Gastelum is real interesting because they're similar in that they both kind of have like a traditional kind of stance. Like I think Whitaker had a karate background, so he stands kind of similarly to Gastelum, where he stands more centered with a wider base, throws a little more interesting kicks and stuff, and Gastelum has like a little more varied of a striking attack. But Gastelum, I think, is quicker and probably a little bit of a better boxer. And so that's an interesting matchup. And I don't know about the Adesanya Whitaker matchup. I mean, that's again is kind of a similar matchup since they have similar styles to the Gastelum Adesanya fight that we're going to see this weekend. But he's not quite as quick in and out as Gastelum. Gastelum's a little lighter on his feet and is able to kind of scoot in and out of range a little better. But Whitaker is just, I think, a more powerful striker and has a more varied striking game. There's a lot more kicks than Gastelum does. So their boxing game is a little similar. I don't know who's a better matchup for Robert Whitaker. They both would be interesting fights to see for sure because it's totally different than anybody we've seen Robert Whitaker fight recently. We've just been seeing him fight Yoel Romero, who's like an incredibly powerful wrestler, like freaking nature from Cuba, and he's just looks like a superhero. It's nuts. So, and seeing Robert Whitaker fight anybody else, fun.
Well, we'll see what happens with that one. And going on to the main event, interim lightweight title fight. We got Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. And yeah, I mean, this is a rematch. These guys already fought before, where Dustin Poirier won the first fight by submission. I think the rematch is gonna be really interesting because Max Holloway is a hell of a fighter, so maybe he picks up the win here on the rematch. We'll see. But it's an interim title because the lightweight title holder Khabib Nurmagomedov, he was suspended and he's also going to take off for Ramadan, so he's not going to plan on fighting till September. It's quite a gap there where he's going to take off. But how do you see this one playing out?
This, again, I think will be another fun striking matchup. So they have similar styles in the sense that they're both good boxers that have really good footwork and are really quick, considering they both used to fight at featherweight and are coming up a weight class. So they're, they don't have to cut as much weight. They're able to put on a little more muscle, kind of work out the way they would like to without having to deplete themselves a little bit to keep under a weight limit. So they're both going to be fast for the division. Holloway is just fast in general, and Holloway actually holds the record for most strikes landed in a fight, most significant strikes landed in a fight, like highest striking percentage accuracy, and all sorts of stuff. And Poirier is not far behind in his accuracy, and they both have a slightly different approach in that Max Holloway is very much sort of similar to like the Diaz brothers, where he's a volume puncher. He throws a ton of punches, a ton of varied punches from different angles, really good boxing, but he throws them at, half power. Doesn't throw them hard, just lands them. And just lands so many that it's just like shattering and overwhelming to his opponents. Like if you watch the Brian Ortega fight, he literally broke that dude's head so much that the guy's corner and the doctors called the fight in between rounds. He didn't knock him out. He just battered him to the point where they were like, we can't let this dude take any more punishment. And Poirier's similar in that he likes to throw a lot of shots, but he likes to throw a lot of shots early at half speed or half power and quicker, and he figures out what works, and then he starts timing what works with more power. So he starts out in the beginning, whereas Holloway will try to feint you a lot, not try to land as many shots at the beginning just to see your timing, and then he just starts putting it on you, picking up the pace as the fight goes on. Poirier is the opposite. He comes out in that first round and throws a ton of shots and just to find out what's going to land. Then once he figures out what's going to land, he starts to figure out timing, and he actually throws less shots as the fight goes on, heavier shots as the fight goes on, and his percentage goes up, at least in his last fight. And this is all, I actually saw these stats on Inside the Octagon with Dan Hardy and John Gooden, which is a show the UFC does, and those stats are crazy because both of those percentages of the strikes that they land are 60+% in the later rounds of the fight. But the difference is you see Holloway landing 130 strikes in a round versus Poirier landing 18 and getting the finish.
Now, have we seen any situations where one of these guys kind of punch themselves out?
No. These dudes are crazy. They're lighter weight dudes. So the lighter weight dudes typically have better gas tanks. It's not as hard to move around a 145, 55 pound frame as it is to move around, 200 plus pounds. So neither of these guys have cardio issues. So it's really a question of who figures out who first, because if Poirier comes out and has a quick start and Holloway has a slow start, if Holloway isn't ready for that storm, because Poirier is one of those fighters where you very much have to weather the storm. That first round, he is just coming forward, just chaos, just throwing everything he can at you. And in that, he figures out what's working. And then Holloway is the guy that's I'm going to see what you're going to do. I'm going to see how you react if I feint this way. I'm going to see how you react if I throw this. Think about it as the round goes on. Think about it between rounds. Come out with the second round and just pick you apart.
But what about, the ground game with this one? The grappling? But because, this is the first time these guys fought, it ended in a submission.
Yep.
So where does that play into this? I mean, we talked a lot about what could happen with the striking, but how do you see the takedowns and takedown defenses playing out in this one?
So we have one of the most, I think the most successful, as far as percentage goes, takedown artist in Dustin Poirier versus one of the most successful takedown defenses in the featherweight and lightweight division in Max Holloway, who has an over 80% takedown defense. And Poirier, who has an over 80% success ratio. So it's that's kind of telling in that they're both really good at what the other one doesn't want. You know what I mean? Typically you would think at this point, especially after the first fight, that Poirier has a better ground game. But Holloway has a good amount of submissions himself. He particularly has developed really, really good takedown defense against a double or single leg when somebody shoots for a takedown as opposed to getting trips or something like that. So typically when we see Poirier go for a takedown, he is squared up against the fence throwing bombs at people, and what Poirier likes to do is throw big power shots when guys have their back against the fence, and then he level changes and goes for the hips. Holloway has actually developed really sneaky, really quick, and really good takedown defense where he stops the takedown and immediately goes for the neck. And he's gotten a couple guillotines and a bunch of chokes just due to the fact that people went to take him down, and as soon as he gets his footing, he switches up and goes for a choke. And has been successful in getting it against guys like Cub Swanson, who's a monster, and I saw somebody else today, I can't remember who it was, but that's his one of his best defenses. So I think if it goes to the ground, Poirier might hold an advantage. Holloway's a great grappler, but his bread and butter is his striking. Same as Poirier, but I think Poirier might be a little more experienced of a grappler. I mean, we saw him submit Holloway in the first fight. Granted, it was when Holloway was 20 years old, but still.
Well, so rematch quite a few years later then, huh?
Yeah, and it's, interesting to see their arcs since then. Holloway becoming the best featherweight champ of all time, and Poirier hit and miss, losing to McGregor, going up division. I mean, interesting storyline, but super, super interesting fight. And I'd be interested to see both guys fight Khabib. Almost would rather see Holloway fight Khabib because they were supposed to fight after McGregor dropped out against Khabib. But, we got to.
Well, we'll just have to see what happens. Real interesting how this card's playing out with the two interim fights as co-main events, and we'll just have to see the aftermath of this when these guys come off their hiatuses to defend their belts.
Yeah.
But thanks for watching. Whether you're watching on thisislitTube.com or YouTube, make sure to subscribe and keep following LitTube, and hope you guys enjoy your evening.
You know why Brock lost, right?
Because he's about to go fight Cormier.
Yeah, Brock lost because he's going to
Oh, yeah, it was all the work. I figured that out. I was like, dude, when we were talking, I was like, dude, he's definitely...
That's what happens every time. Every time he comes up to the UFC, they make him give up his belt. And he comes over, he fights UFC, then he goes back and he wins his belt back again.
But what's
He's a
great...
marketing genius.
It's like a circle,
Yeah.